The Miami Dolphins made a significant change to their special teams outlook and made a significant addition to their front office structure. We got all that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. We're going to put the quintessential football nerd hat on and talk about punting today on the show. We're going to get into a mock draft. I did a 3-round mock draft for the 33rd team. I wanted to get into the players that I picked for the Dolphins in that situation, and who else was in consideration that was or was not on the board for the Dolphins with the latest forecast for the 2025 NFL Draft. The Dolphins made an addition for a senior personnel executive, Champ Kelly. We'll talk about him, formerly of the Las Vegas Raiders, a number of different stops. Very impressive individual to have in your front office ecosystem. So we'll talk about all of that here today on the show. So let's start with Ryan Stonehouse, because Ryan Stonehouse comes to the Dolphins. He was a restricted free agent after this past season in 2024, and the Titans elected not to give him a restricted free agent tender and instead said, you're more than welcome to hit unrestricted free agents here. We're going to go with a more experienced punter. He did have a regression in net yards per punt last year. Ryan Stonehouse did after coming off of a season-ending injury in 2023. But as a rookie, this was a second-team All-Pro as a rookie in the NFL. He, for his first 2 seasons in the NFL, led the NFL in yards per punt. It's a big-time leg. He has a boomstick when it comes to punting the football. So he is 25 years old. He's going to turn 26 in May, so a little less than 2 months. And he joined the Tennessee Titans out of Colorado State. So Ryan Stonehouse, obviously, the team made the decision, Tennessee, to not give him a restricted free agent tender, and based off this regression in net yards per punt, there's a lot of feedback from Tennessee fans that Ryan Stonehouse isn't good anymore. And if you live on social media, you've probably encountered some of that buzz and feedback. So I put on my grinding the tape hat, and I went back and watched a lot of the punts that Ryan Stonehouse had this past year. They had a disastrous game against Detroit, where I think it was a 48 and 90-yard return. The 90-yard return went for a touchdown. But if you believe that Ryan Stonehouse forgot how to kick, I got bad news for you, Titans fans. He didn't forget how to kick. And one of the biggest themes that I had, there was this feedback about, or this narrative that exists with Ryan Stonehouse, that he outkicks the punt coverage way too often. And there were instances where that does happen. And I'm not going to get too far into punting mechanics, but he's got a very punchy stroke when he hits the ball, and it results in a little bit less of the looping end-over-end long hang time punts, and it results in a lot of distance at times. But Tennessee got this cat out there on playing on the gunner. Number 80 is an undrafted free agent wide receiver, runs 4.6. Based off the look of what he looked like this past year in Tennessee, I don't think he's ever played gunner before in his life. He's getting bench pressed 4 yards deep into the stands. He's on the ground. He's tripping his teammates. The punt coverage was not good in Tennessee. They were slow. They couldn't get down the field. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like for the Dolphins. I know Elijah Campbell's back, and he was one of the gunners for the Dolphins last year, and Sirron Neal was the other. And Elijah Campbell made his roster spot in the NFL by being a very good special teams player. So I would have some level of expectation that a throwaway roster spot on a sixth wide receiver that's going to go out there and play gunner and can't get off of anybody and is taking poor angles because the returner's stepping up to catch the football and you don't adjust from your track and your angle from where he first lined up, even though the ball moved him off that spot, and you're giving up big-time returns as a result of that. It's kind of a mess, right? And Craig Aukerman is the Dolphins' new special teams coordinator, and he was dismissed in 2023 when the Titans had a couple of blocked punts, and one of them resulted in Stonehouse having an injury. The right off the Wikipedia page, he was fired after week 13 in an overtime loss in 2023. The Titans' answer this year at coordinator didn't give me any more enthusiasm in regards to the answers that they had, because there's no integrity. The rush lanes, the field side gunners coming all the way down and getting washed inside of the returner and giving up the entirety of the outside of the field. So not to get into punt coverage X's and O's, but there was a lot of other things other than just Ryan Stonehouse coming back from injury and his kicking trajectory being a little different that contributed to him having this big time regression in net yards per punt, which he did experience in his first two seasons. It was 43.4 and 44.3. This year it was down 6 yards from the previous season. Does some of that have to do with Ryan Stonehouse and some of the punts that he had? Sure. Does a lot of it also have to do with the guys you had out on coverage in Tennessee? Also, yes. I don't think there's any question this is an upgrade over Jake Bailey. And when you heard that they weren't going to tender him and he was on the market, I was really excited for the potential, because of the pre-existing relationship that existed with Aukerman, that the Dolphins could have a chance to get him in the building. And lo and behold, it was announced yesterday he is signing a 1-year contract with the team. Now, they haven't formally moved on from Jake Bailey yet, at least to reports. But I would assume Stonehouse, having the inside track and the experience with Aukerman, that this is going to be a replacement type situation, and the Dolphins should be able to enjoy an upgrade on special teams. So brought to you by the fan base that brought you Aaron Brewer Sucks managed to one up themselves with the sequel to say that Ryan Stonehouse sucks as well. But that, after watching the tape, I can confirm is not true. We have Champ Kelly to get into next here on the show, the new addition to the Dolphins front office with his background. We're going to get into a little bit of that, why that may matter, why he's a name you may have heard before. We're getting into all of that here on the show. Stick with us. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondering, where the heck did all my money go? Between dining out, shopping online, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control on your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you could just stop managing your money and start building wealth. When you use Monarch Money, maybe you realize how much you're spending on food delivery and the extra fees that are involved to get that two-door delivery, so you can budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet with FanDuel wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who is cutting down the nets. If you've got your eye on a couple of underdogs, FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every day, there's always some exciting action for you to bet on. The FanDuel app is easy and simple to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around for your funds. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Champ Kelly, newest member of the Miami Dolphins. This posting came out at the end of the weekend, or at the end of last week. Former Raiders assistant GM Champ Kelly, this is from Adam Schefter, who interviewed for multiple GM jobs across the league in recent years, has agreed to join the Dolphins as a senior personnel executive working in both pro and college scouting. I've had the chance down at the Senior Bowl to meet and speak with Champ a few times, so I'm a little more familiar with him than maybe some of the other names for executives that don't hold high-end titles, although he's coming off of serving as the assistant general manager from 22 to 24 with the Las Vegas Raiders. Champ's a really smart dude, and I know the first question everybody's going to ask about any hire or anybody that's going into an executive role and as part of a decision-making team is what's he responsible for? And it's really hard to say, but when you listen to Champ Kelly talk, and there's a great podcast with Rhett Lewis and Bucky Brooks that Champ Kelly does. You can find it on YouTube. It's about 27 minutes long. He talks about his role in facilitating the vision of the decision makers for the team that he is a part of. And, that ultimately, I think, creates a lot of gray area and blurry lines as far as who's an asset, who's not an asset, who's bringing quality things to the table, where are the broken things that are preventing this team as the Dolphins from getting over the hump of where they've kind of been stuck. And does Champ Kelly I don't know. I can't tell you with definitive certainty because I'm not a part of the internal process and a part of understanding how they run every facet of their organization. But I do know Champ individually with his pathway. And if he's there to facilitate what the Dolphins are trying to do, I don't think this is a hire that's going to dramatically reshape any individual dynamic of the Dolphins. But knowing him individually and knowing some of the viewpoints that he has on football and talking the couple of times that I've had a chance to speak with him, he's a really smart guy. And he's been accurate on a lot of stuff that I've had a chance in the couple of times that I've sat down and spoken with him in passing down at these all-star events or whatnot. You should be really, really glad to have another good mind in the decision-making process. And I think what's interesting was you consider Champ Kelly. If you're not familiar with like his grassroots background, he played Kentucky. He played football at the University of Kentucky and graduated with a degree in computer sciences, and then worked for IBM as a software engineer for several years before he's coaching high school football and it gets back into the game. And then he ends up coaching for an indoor league and becomes the general manager of that indoor league. And he talked on that same podcast that I alluded to with Rhett Lewis and Bucky Brooks about the experiences of being the general manager in a one-man band on such a small operation. He was responsible for everything from helping to set up and do the laundry after the game, to marketing and sales, to player evaluation, to coach evaluation, to hiring and firing processes. Like every aspect of that business ran through him. And what he talked about was that experience left the mark on Champ Kelly as far as all of the roles and responsibilities that, when you get into a bigger environment like the NFL, where there's different departments that handle different things and there's much more resources at your disposal. The way that those culture pieces can connect with a vision from the top down, because at that smaller place, it was one person that influenced all of those operations elements of running a team. So Champ got his first job in the NFL as a college scout in 2007, and then he transitioned into an assistant coordinator for pro and college scouting. And then he goes to Chicago in 2010 and he's the assistant director of pro personnel. And then he gets promoted to the director of pro scouting. And then he gets promoted to assistant director of player personnel. And then he goes to the Raiders when they made their hires of Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels. And he's the assistant GM there. And then McDaniels doesn't work out and Ziegler leaves and he's the interim GM. And then they make another hire for GM with Telesco. And then that doesn't work out, but he was kept on staff under Telesco. And then they just kind of flushed the system this past year. And he mutually agreed to part ways with the Raiders in February of 2025. But he's been getting significant interest along the way for GM positions. He's interviewed with the Jets. He's interviewed with the Falcons. He's interviewed with the Broncos. And that's on the last 5 years for GM positions. Now, obviously, this latest stop along the way for him, the assistant GM spot in Las Vegas, is a critical piece of his resume to eventually have potentially a GM opportunity. But when you consider where the Dolphins are at, and there was some murmurs or rumors or whispers or whatever about Chris Greer and his future with the team this past year, and there was some allusion to maybe Chris stepping away and either retiring or taking the Tannenbaum promotion and going upwards to be phased out and somebody else being in position. This is a really interesting figure, I think, to have in the building if those rumors behind the scenes were actually things that are under consideration for the next several years of snapshot of what this football team is going to look like. Because if that's the case, you have in-house right now somebody that has been coveted for their contributions and very clearly gets it because he had the grassroots start. And I think it just makes for a really interesting subplot where it's a name that I would not be surprised if you need to know at some point along the way, because he's getting GM interviews elsewhere as a member of your organization, or if there are hierarchy changes, and this being a party that's just come in 2025, who can maybe step into and fulfill that role. But there's a lot of gray. Make no mistake. And people are going to ask, okay, what did Champ Kelly provide for the Dolphins in 2025 that they didn't already have? It's the same like Reggie McKenzie question, right? Or Marv Allen question. And because you're not in the building, you don't have those answers. But I am uniquely qualified from having met Champ before to know that this is somebody who has a lot of great perspective and is a name that you should know, whether it's in Miami or elsewhere. Want to get into this latest 2025 mock draft next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
So the Dolphins making 3 picks in my latest mock draft for the 33rd team. And obviously the first wave of free agency kind of having come and gone at this point, it has changed the dynamics for a lot of football teams. Like there's a lot of things that look different from a picks perspective and a projections perspective, because if the teams are going to invest, I just listened to Eric DeCosta yesterday. He did a conference interview with Adam Brenneman. Brenneman's a former college player who has his own sports media company now, and he's involved in broadcasting and this and that. And he did a sit-down hour-long interview with Eric DeCosta. And somebody in the crowd, when they got to kind of the crowdsourcing questions, asked DeCosta about the challenges of drafting for need versus best player available, and how do those dynamics work in a real-life setting versus what's been romanticized. And DeCosta, long story short, he said, if you have players that are very closely graded together, more often than not, what becomes the tiebreaker is if you have a need at one position versus another, provided the grades are close enough. And I think that's one of those things where if I look at my board for just the Carolina Panthers, right, they signed a couple defensive tackles. They added some pass rush help. They added a safety. And Carolina coming in, you could say they needed pass rush help. But where they really need help is linebacker. So if you put the Shamar Stewart, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M, and you put Jahdae Campbell up there, and if those grades are close together, you could say, well, the pass rush element, there's a favorability for the positional value, but Jahdae Campbell fills a need where right now we have Christian Roseboom or Trevin Wallace penciled in to be a starter for us on defense. Let's now take Jahdae Campbell, right? Like those needs can break ties. And you see that all throughout this mock draft that I wrote for the 3013. I want to talk about the 3 players that I picked for the Dolphins and then talk a little bit about the other players that were in consideration that were on the board. So Miami in this mock draft picked Jahdae Barron, the defensive back from Texas, at pick number 13. Inside-outside capability. So when you consider Ramsey, Kohu, Barron, the versatility now of the safeties that you've brought in, specifically Melifonwu, you now have a lot of ambiguity for coverage disguises. And you go back to last year and you saw Kader Kohu lining up in the nickel, and then he's inverting and playing deep half, and the safety's rolling down and he's playing hard flat, and then the corner's pushing in and he's playing hook. Like there's all kinds of geometry shifts and changing of pictures that you can create when you have guys that are comfortable doing all those different things. Barron's another piece of that puzzle. And that's a big piece of the reason why he was the pick. Now, you want to play him outside, you can play outside. You want to play Kader outside and play Barron in the slot, you can play Barron in the slot. I'd argue he's probably a better fit inside. But it's kind of that people are romanticizing Barron's skill set because of how effective Brian Branch has been in Detroit, even though Branch is a safety playing it. Barron's a bigger player. Barron's a much more explosive player. And now this past year, he had the ball skills to go with it. So Barron, the pick at number 13. The pick at 48, Dolphins broke the tie here. Alfred Collins, defensive tackle, Texas. So a couple of Texas Longhorns here. This is a big 330-pound, 35-inch arms, over 7-foot wingspan. He's a massive human being, elite run blocking or run deconstructing player with, I think, enough athleticism and disruption that he can give you some quality collapsing of the pocket on early downs. Now you get in obvious pass rush situations, he's going to be off the field, I think. But Alfred Collins, obviously the need at defensive tackle for the Dolphins right now speaks for itself. And then you get to 98. And this pick for the Dolphins was Caleb Rogers, an offensive lineman from Texas Tech. Really impressive combine showcase for him. But what you need to know about Caleb Rogers is he's a multi-position player, predominantly on the right-hand side. But he checked in at 6'5", 315 pounds. He doesn't have tackle length. He's 32 and a half inches on the arms. But he ran a 5'1" flat. He had a 34-inch vertical jump at 315 pounds. It's a stupid number. It's astronomically explosive. And I think you see that when you watch him on tape when he's uncovered, right? And sometimes it's a guard. Sometimes it's a tackle in the Big 12. You don't see a lot of NFL-style fronts there. It's a lot more playing in space and 3 down and playing drop 8. So it's not a 1-for-1. But I think you get enough reps and looks to see what he can do on down blocks and combinations and creating movement. And then obviously when you have that space, you see a player that has to play in space. And that's a lot of what the point of emphasis is for the Dolphins offensive line in this scheme is we want guys that can be dynamic enough to play in space and create for your playmakers blocks in space. But simultaneously, we want guys that have a little bit more toughness to create movement at the point of attack. And he does that. And he's played over 4,000 snaps. And a lot of it came at offensive tackle, but he's played in multiple spots. So he's kind of in that bucket for me with guys like Miles Frazier from LSU. And we're almost at the point where we're going to start doing these player profiles, and we're going to hit him pretty hard over the next month here. But Miles Frazier from LSU, I would put in the same bucket as him, as if I'm looking at other offensive lineman. Jalen Travis from Iowa State is in the same bucket and conversation for me. Jalen Rivers from the University of Miami, who has played guard and tackle, is another name for me that kind of fits in that bucket of they're all kind of similar in that they've played tackle. They have some emergency flex. I think they're all better suited inside at guard. Rodgers is one of the more dynamic ones that is available, but you're not giving up concessions for size at 315, and he's posting those kinds of numbers. So that was the motivation for me to pick Caleb Rodgers, because right now everybody's pulling their hair out about the Dolphins bringing back Liam Eichenberg. I still think there's another free agency move to be had there. I really do. But if you went, hypothetically, Patrick Paul, this is hypothetically assuming Toronto Armstead's going. If you and Patrick Paul, James Daniels, I would want James Daniels playing next to Patrick Paul. Daniels has flexibility to go any of those three spots on the interior, but I would want James Daniels playing next to Patrick Paul. And then you have Aaron Brewer. And then you have mystery bag free agent edition plus third round draft choice competing for a starting spot with Liam Eichenberg and Larry Borum also in the picture. And I don't want Liam Eichenberg to start. I can't state that enough. I want him, if he's going to be on the roster, he needs to be your 8th offensive lineman or worse. So that's the numbers game that you now have to play if you're the Dolphins to figure out how to make that happen. And then Austin Jackson at right tackle. I feel like, that there's a lot more mass at the guard spots. I think there's a lot more athleticism at the guard spots. And that should lead to much more consistent performance from the guard spots as well. So that's the selling point that I have for Caleb Rodgers is, it's not a first round pick because, quite frankly, if Will Campbell would have made it there, I'd have probably taken Will Campbell, but Will Campbell went off the board at 12 to Dallas. Names that I would have taken if I were Miami at 13 instead of Jahdae Barron that were off the board by the time that they picked included Armand Membu, who went top 6, Jahad Campbell, who went 8 to the Carolina Panthers, Tyler Warren. If he was on the board at tight end, I probably would have taken over Jahdae Barron as well at Y tight end. Will Johnson goes top 10. Kenneth Grant goes 11 to San Francisco, the defensive tackle for Michigan. And then Will Campbell goes 12 to the Dallas Cowboys to kind of replace Zach Martin. So didn't get a great board fall. It was between Jahdae Barron, Shamar Stewart, Nicky Manwari, Michael Williams. Those are some of the names for me. Malachi Starks. Those were some of the names for me that was probably like the top 5. Here's the names in consideration. How closely are they all graded together? And where does the tiebreaker lead me from a positional value standpoint and from an area of need standpoint? Applying that Eric DeCosta theory in real life. Now, the pick at 48, Gray Zabel went 45 to the Indianapolis Colts. He would have been the pick over Alfred Collins if he was available. Shavon Revel went 44. I probably wouldn't have double dipped at corner, but it was an enticing name. And then Nick Scorton, defensive lineman, went to Chicago at 41. And then Elik Ayumanor, wide receiver, big body wide receiver. Him and Nicholas Rukakini would be a lot of fun if you're going to move on from Tyreek Hill. But he went 40 to New Orleans. So those players were all off the board. So players in consideration at 48 for me, just to kind of give you some more names to start doing research on your own before you do these prospect deep dives and positional groups and start stacking our big board. Tate Ratledge, offensive guard from Georgia, was in consideration. I had Alfred Collins graded ahead of him. Jonas Saavanea from Arizona, offensive tackle, can play inside at guard. Had Alfred Collins as a higher graded player. Jared Ivey, end tackle, defensive lineman, like flex type player. But the need for an interior player that is so looming right now was a big tiebreaker that pushed it in that direction for me as well. And then TJ Sanders, defensive tackle from South Carolina, was kind of the other interior defensive lineman that was in consideration for me at the pick at 48. And then at 98, Caleb Rodgers is the pick. Really the only of the player that I had like firmly in consideration was Lathan Ransom, safety from Ohio State, whom I'm a really big fan of, but He's a player who's had some durability issues. He's a player who isn't like a big-time ball hawk on the back end. So when you consider what the Dolphins added with Ashton Davis, who's more of a high post player, they obviously have Patrick McMorris and Elijah Campbell that are competing for a safety 3 spot right now. And you have Ifitu Melifonwu as kind of the hybrid piece that they've already brought in, who is better playing low and on the second level. Just felt a little redundant to also have Jahdae Barron in the draft class, so that's where we went with the offensive lineman with Caleb Rogers. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Hope you guys enjoyed this look at Ryan Stonehouse and the lies that Titans fans are telling you. Look at Champ Kelly and why it's hard to tell what he's going to bring in 2025, but why I do think he is a player to watch in the Game of Thrones of the Dolphins and GM positions across the league in the years to come. And latest mock draft or the 3013. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here. Go Fins. Talk to you all again soon.